People are animals too, darn it. Today, my guest is Abby Volin. She is the president of Opening Doors. Welcome, Abby.
Good. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to have you. This is such a hot topic right now. Before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Opening Doors?
Yes. My background is I'm an attorney, and I worked as a litigator for many years. And you know that I was always doing animal welfare work, but about 8 years ago, I managed to switch to doing animal welfare work about full time, which has been really a pleasure. I worked at the Humane Society of the United States for a while. I did a lot of public policy work dealing with housing and breed and animal accommodation laws. And then I started my own consulting and legal company. And, what we do, we basically, we help people with their pet-related housing problems. So whether or not it's property, housing providers or commercial properties or universities, and then, implementing better pet programs, that are just more contemporary and fit with the way we keep pets these days. And it's also helping them. It's interesting that the service that they are the most interested in with me is handling their animal accommodation issues. That's their big topic. And then with tenants, I help them with their pet-related housing problems when they're having trouble with their landlord, when they're, they're being threatened that they have to get evicted, or if they don't understand the reasonable accommodation process. So we help animal welfare organizations by helping them develop tools that will expand housing options for people with pets.
It's really amazing because you have been doing this work, great work, because we know it's a hot topic throughout the country in normal times. But right now, boy, howdy, did you probably become very popular. You need to duplicate yourself, I think, multiply yourself. So let's dive into what's happening right now. And I just read an article right before we got on the call that was written for Forbes. It came out on July 26th, and it's just an update on what's happening with the CARES Act, or CARES 2. And it says that the moratorium on evictions is set to expire July 24th, which we are now 3 days. That was 3 days ago. And they're extending this into a new package. So first of all, can you explain what does that mean to all of us that aren't in this world, and what's the impact on it?
Mm-hmm. So when they say that the eviction moratorium is expiring, that is the one under the CARES Act, which was the federal government who created this eviction moratorium. And it is only for people who live in federally subsidized housing, or if they live in housing that has received federal financial assistance. So this actually only impacts about a quarter of renters, but it also impacts people who have mortgages that are backed by federal finances. So it impacts some owners, and it impacts renters, but that's only 25%. So we still have this gaping hole. And what has happened is that the states have come in. And so essentially every state has a different eviction moratorium that they passed. There were a couple states that didn't pass anything, but most of them did. And those protections vary wildly. And in fact, sometimes different metropolitan areas within those states have different eviction moratoriums. So if you live in Atlanta, you're going to have a different rule than if you lived in Athens, Georgia, right? It's just different everywhere. A lot of these moratoriums have expired. We're also seeing that some states they've stepped in again, and they are extending those moratoriums. So Massachusetts, for example, they just extended theirs to October, I believe. Washington, D.C., ours is essentially expanded to December because it's 60 days after the moratorium. And again, with these eviction moratoriums varying widely, in some states, you only have that protection if it is for non-payment of rent due to COVID. However, all other reasons you might be evicted, if it's a lease violation or anything else, you can still be evicted during this time of eviction moratoriums. That's most states where they have something where it has to be COVID related. And again, what's been interesting is some states, they actually make you have to prove that your non-payment of rent is due to a COVID related issue. Now, DC, which has a really broad, generous rule, evictions for all reasons are on hold right now. You can still have an eviction notice filed against you, but they can't bring you to court or move anywhere in the eviction process for any reason. And I mean, that really does make sense, because this isn't just about people who are having economic difficulties, but this is also about, we need to stay separate. We need to stay in our home. And if people are being evicted and don't have anywhere to go, that's just going to exacerbate the public health issue we're having.
This is all really very interesting. And I'm the first to admit, I do not like politics. I don't like the whole way that laws are passed. I have a twin sister who loves all of it, and I can't stand it. And this is one of the main reasons, is that nothing's ever perfect. And there's all of these, you make the rule, and then there's all these repercussions that these people that were trying to do the right thing didn't forecast would happen. And it just, this ripple effect is really difficult. So I have it's on topic, but a little off. We talk a lot about this. Is there any protection that is being provided to landlords?
That's a great question. And I think that is also really another piece of this puzzle, because so many landlords, they're small businesses. They're small. Yeah. They're not these multi-million-dollar corporations. I'm a landlord myself. I have one property that I rent out, and thank goodness my renters so far, they're still paying. So again, this is really going to depend on the state. This is also something that the CARES Act is looking into. There have been a lot of rules that, again, are kind of forgiving the mortgage payments for the moment. But still, if you rely on that income, that makes it hard. So that's where, the unemployment benefits are going to really, really have an impact over all of this. And like you said, it's a ripple effect. So the unemployment insurance is a big part of this. And then the federal and state eviction laws and municipal eviction moratoriums, they all fall into this, and it is a ripple effect.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that just because there's some forgiveness or a delay doesn't mean you get your rent for free or your mortgage for free. It's accumulating debt, essentially. So I'm just waiting that, depending on how long this lasts, and there's going to have to be some program that helps forgive a tremendous amount of debt we're going to have in the country.
Well, most states, they are waiving fees. So you're not going to be charged for delaying your rent, but you are going to have to pay it eventually. So you're right. Yeah. We're just kind of passing the buck right now, and we're waiting, and we just keep on pushing when that problem is going to really manifest itself. We just keep pushing it forward further into the future. But it is something we're going to have to deal with. And I think you're right about being annoyed with everything politics and how bills get passed, because this is something that we should be planning for now, because it's foreseeable. We know it's going to happen. So we do need to be thinking about it.
So can you explain? I mean, for a lot of us, the listeners, we will hopefully never be involved in the eviction process. But we do really need to educate ourselves on how this works and the resources. So can we talk a little bit just about, and I know that eviction may change depending on location, but is there kind of a general scope you can provide on how an eviction process works?
The problem is the eviction process is going to vary by state, and it can vary by municipality. New York City is going to have a different eviction process than upstate New York. So it's hard to give generalizations other than a landlord cannot evict you. A landlord cannot evict you. Let me say that one more time. A landlord cannot evict you. They can start a proceeding, but it is a judge that evicts you. It is a judge that serves the order to evict you. And so people will freak out. They'll say, oh my gosh, my landlord just sent me a letter and said, if I don't get rid of this pet by the end of the weekend, he's going to evict me and I'll be done. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because different states will have different time periods between which a resident will receive a notice to cure, a notice saying you're in violation of your lease, and if you don't do this by X date, we're going to start an eviction proceeding. So for example, in DC, it's 30 days. You have 30 days to cure or to move out before anything in court is filed. In some states, it's 3 days. Some states don't have any at all, right? So you have to know what kind of notice that people are entitled to, because a lot of times landlords, and certainly not all, but the ones that aren't as kind or honest, they use letters to just intimidate people. They don't let them know that they have 30 days. They just count on people not knowing their rights and freaking out and just fixing the problem. So you have to know at least how much time you have to cure the problem before any kind of court proceeding will get started. And it's also important to know what are the in your state, what are the reasons for which you kind of get evicted? It's not the same everywhere. Most states do not allow self-help eviction. And what that means is that the landlord cannot change the locks on you. The landlord cannot throw your stuff out on the street. Self-help evictions simply are not allowed. And so that's where I go back to, the court is the one who can approve an eviction. And
yeah, I've been hearing about that. I'd never heard of that term before, but I knew that landlords go in and change the keys or the locks and do that kind of forceful attempt at eviction.
Yeah, and I can't tell you off the top of my head that all 50 states plus DC prohibit prohibit landlords from throwing around on the street themselves. But it is in most states where self-help eviction is just not allowed.
So, and again, this might be a question that's dependent on municipality, but so you get notice, you get the letter, and then there's a date that says you have to go before a judge, or it's going to be, could a judge say you've had 30 days or you've had 60 days until this proceeding, you have to be out by tomorrow?
Probably not.
Okay.
And I will say that the attorney answer to pretty much every question is going to be, it depends. That's always the certainly if someone is a direct danger to the community, that could provide exigent circumstances. But, in general, a landlord is going to have to prove to the court that this person should be evicted. And, the tenant, they have their day in court too. The problem is people don't know their rights. They don't know that, they don't know that they have an opportunity to defend themselves. They aren't able to take off time from work to go to these proceedings. They have no idea what to do because they don't have an attorney and they can't afford to hire an attorney. So the court proceedings can be very tricky for tenants who have no idea what they're doing, and a lot of the landlords, they go to the courthouse once a week and, have their list of 10 evictions that they're starting. And then, they will, they'll present all the information to the court. And then if nobody's there to dispute what the landlord's saying, I, I would be surprised if anyone could be evicted right then and there. But then also, even if you are, even when the eviction notice is, or the eviction order is served, it still has to be, you still need notice. It still has to be delivered to the tenant, and they still have have to get a certain amount of time of notice before they're actually evicted.
So let's say the judge comes in, says, yes, you need to vacate the property, and then they don't vacate. Who's doing that door knocking to say you need to leave?
And marshals will come in. That's when the sheriff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they can throw your stuff out on the street.
Okay. And so, I think that you were on this call with Kristen, the weekly call, when she brought on one of her, what does she call it? It's an amazing name for this person, but it was basically the authority to go in and evict. And they had worked out this great relationship that if need be, the pets could remain in the home for 24 hours while they found new housing. There was something involved where the shelter would take them in. Mm-hmm. Do you have any information on any other organizations that do that kind of work where they're partnering with that authority body to protect these animals?
That's a good question. I don't know of any animal shelters or municipalities that have that kind of relationship. There are shelters that do have temporary, will take an animal in on a temporary basis. There's a great organization now in Atlanta called Pause Between Homes, and they have certain criteria, and they will fill that gap between when someone loses their housing and they can get new housing where they can take their pet in. So there are groups here and there that they're trying to fill in that gap, but really the best solution is to just find a way to keep the person and the pet together somehow. Whether or not it's, a shelter could be giving, call your neighbors, call your friends, call your coworkers, is there anyone who can take in this animal temporarily? And the shelter can do things like providing crates or providing blankets or providing food, right? To make it easier if, someone can just give a bathroom, can this cat live in the carrier just for, 1.5 days right, while we find a new solution, or one of those or one of the cages, right, like the wire crate cages, cages, and just it's not ideal, right, but when it's short term, and it's very, very short term, you're at least giving people a breather without having to bring the animal into the shelter. And really, right, we want to keep animals out of the shelter as much as possible.
Yes. And I think that what a lot of shelters are experiencing right now, especially due to COVID and not being able to take animals in, is that the work that we do in our community really saves the shelter money, time, rather than what we've always been is, we'll take your pet, we'll find a good new home. And really it can't be measured on how great it is to keep those families together. When someone is evicted, do you know, what does that do to their record, and how hard is it for them to then find a new home?
That definitely puts a bad mark on their record. And that will make future landlords very wary of renting to them. Certain states will have different things on the eviction records. Some of them will say this eviction was for non-payment of rent, or some of them might give reasons, but most of them, it's just you've got an X there on your record, and it's going to make it impossible to find another place that is going to accept accept you as a tenant, except for, when you get into bad housing situations and, the ones that really don't care, or not don't care, but, they specialize for, low-income tenants who have really bad housing history, credit history. And it's just not, it's not stable. It's housing insecurity. And housing insecurity is one of the main drivers of public health, of a healthy community. It helps with social cohesion and keeping everyone together. If you are worried about where you're going to spend the night, you can't focus on work or school or getting anything else in your life together. It impacts, where you live. It impacts the schools that you have access to. It impacts transportation. Basically, there are like 9 social factors that are determinants of healthy communities. Housing is one of them, and it impacts basically all, every single one, or nearly every single one. So not being able to get housing, or just never knowing when someone's going to kick you out, that just really leads to degradation of communities, and it affects health outcomes. And you can see that in neighborhoods where it's just housing, so many residents don't have stable housing, they also have poor health outcomes.
Which then adds a burden on so many of the programs that the government offers that, and it feels as though the world, when they say, lift them up by the bootstraps, that you can do this. But really, when we have a systemic issue that is continually putting bricks on top of people, like it's not okay. And if we were more, in just my opinion, trying not to be political, but I think when we look at the community as a whole and not individuals, we really come out ahead. And at our shelter, we made some pretty big switches just around like that punitive model, like, oh, you can't afford your pet, well, then you're not getting it back, and really moved into a support model. And what we found was that it doesn't actually cost that much money, that almost just the idea that people have somebody that believes in them and wants to support them goes so much further than, well, if you don't do this, you're going to go to jail. And I'm like, okay, come on. Like, I love the whole movement in animal welfare right now. And if the more people we can get behind it, I feel like we have an opportunity that we could make animal welfare could lead a positive like revolution in the way that we look at the things we do in this country.
Right. The maxim, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, holds true everywhere, and particularly in these kinds of situations where you have housing instability, where people don't know where they're going to sleep or eat or work. And so how can it's very difficult for them to have their pet too. But their pets really do provide a source of comfort. So this all bleeds in together.
We've talked about everything that is happening, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of shelters that are listening, and they really want to be there and they want to help the community. And so some of the things that you've shared so far was that your landlord doesn't evict you, a judge does, and that you really need to know the laws on what is appropriate for what you can be evicted for in each of the states or municipalities. So can you tell us, like, shelters are going to be really careful about not getting into any legal or providing legal advice. So how do we as organizations develop tools to help empower community members to understand their rights? And really, what organizations should we be partnering with that do this work already?
I think that there are some really big categories that you just need to know the answer to, and you can make a chart, right? It's how much notice is allowed or is required between a landlord's, serving you a notice of eviction and when the court proceedings start. You want to know what's the retaliation statute. When a landlord takes adverse action against a tenant who is just asserting their rights, if that's within a certain period of time, it's considered retaliation. And again, people don't know this. So that's that, you know, if you can just provide those kinds of dates in a chart. How much does your state allow for security deposits? So when, you know, a landlord is charging you a pet security deposit on top of the regular one, are they violating local laws? So it's knowing your rights like that. It's knowing when might you have a reasonable accommodation claim, an accommodation for service or assistance animals, which whole other topic that it's my bread and butter, and I love talking about it, but the idea that there's rampant fraud just does not bear out in fact in the data. It is all anecdotal, and it's wrong. There really is not a scourge of fraudulent use of service and assistance animals. It's people not knowing the rules. It is attorneys who are just being overly risk adverse, and housing providers that are not asserting their rights. Plus bad pet policies that just really don't work with the way we live these days. So knowing what your rights are for that, not under federal law, but also under state laws, because state laws can provide more protection. So it's knowing how to recognize these kinds of issues. In terms of working with other service providers, you know, in general, we're certainly moving towards a practice of getting involved with the human service social providers, right? Of getting involved with the Meals on Wheels and poverty advocates and homeless advocates, legal aid, so that you can get, you know, the landlord tenant laws, the eviction process, fair housing attorneys, social workers, and medical clinics. There are just so many types of advocates that it's smart to develop these relationships with. Domestic violence advocates, that's a big one. You know, I saw that your group, you facilitate rehoming for people outside of the shelter, as well as pause between homes. Like, these kinds of tools are just really important to have and to know that they're available. Tenant associations, because you want to make sure that tenants know what these rules are in terms of animals, how it impacts animals. And you want to make sure that they know that you're there for them as the animal welfare organization. When they learn of you know, tenants that are having problems, they can refer them to the shelter, or they can know that the shelter has certain resources to help them, right? It's just a lot of times we're working past each other because we're not coordinating our services. You wanna partner with animal behaviorists and trainers, veterinarians, again, so that you can try to keep these pets out of the shelter and into homes. You know, so it's getting yourself out there and integrating yourself within the community social service, which, you know, them in and of itself, in and of themselves, they may not be connected either. So that does take a lot of work, a lot of relationship building. Certainly, pull your volunteers and your adopters and your fosters. There is very likely, and maybe this is my bias because I live in DC, but, you know, there's very likely a lawyer somewhere in your supporters, or someone who knows someone who might be able to help with, you know, gathering this information, or knows an organization that they can turn to. So certainly, you know, use the resources that you already have with your supporters, and see what they have available, what they can do for you. And of course, you know, at Opening Doors, that's precisely what we do as well.
So that was a great segue, because I was going to ask you, so if organizations throughout the country listen and they want assistance, are you able to help, or do you have a region that you help? How does your service work?
We work nationally. We work with animal welfare organizations and housing providers and tenants across the country. And you know, we help them with developing tools that will expand options for people with pets. We help them, you know, understand what their rights are. We give them workshops. We can do the connecting them with some service providers in their community. But at the end of the day, there is no magic bullet. There is not like this one solution that if you follow these steps, you're going to knock down all housing barriers in your community, right? We're playing the long game, and there are certainly steps that we can be taking to push it along. And I think we need to be playing more offensively rather than defensively. Don't wait for people to get kicked out of their housing because of evictions. You need to be doing things right now to empower pet owners so that they can advocate for themselves.
Yeah. And the other thing we've been seeing in our community, and we're in North Idaho, and it's somewhat rural. Well, it is rural. So we tend to experience things a little bit behind everybody else. But we find neighbors taking in neighbors, people coming together, and the reason it's impactful for us is that we go to someone's house. We have a Pets for Life program, and we'll visit someone's house, and we're like, you have 5 dogs, and not like 10 dogs, and then they're not all altered. And he'll be like, well, my 5 different neighbors lost their homes, and they're all living with me right now. And so we tend to place judgment on people off of a situation that we're just viewing, and the idea that if you don't have the money, you shouldn't have a pet. And then when you dive in and you really learn the human story, you find out that this superhuman has just opened up a very small home to his friends and family members that are in a vulnerable situation. And you realize that they're really heroes that are really trying to help people get out of the circumstance.
Instead of spending resources on taking animals in, spend those resources in the community, helping people, be successful pet owners, pet parents. That is really one of the crucial aspects. It usually costs less money to help people outside of the shelter rather than, bringing the animals in.
Yes. So Abby, this has been really great. I appreciate you taking the time. I've already made a note that I'm going to reach out to you about reasonable accommodation claims, so we can do another call soon. This is all stuff that as shelters, we are so much of the time dealing with what's just in front of us, and we don't have the staffing resources that other businesses would have. And so this kind of information is just so important because we have no idea until it hits us. So this idea to be proactive, to do the research, to know things are coming is immensely helpful. I always try to end our podcast with asking if there's anything that you've been reading or any resources that you'd like to share that would help people grow their understanding of the topic today.
Learn more about what's going on with coronavirus. And if your state has not extended the eviction moratorium, start organizing to force them to do it. Start protesting, start forcing the issue, because that's how change is made, through people power. And start organizing with other community members, for which are impacted by the evictions that are going to start tumbling out. So know your rights, know how to assert them. And right now, we have to do everything we can to extend these eviction moratoriums. So that means organizing. If your state hasn't extended it yet, find ways to do it, because that is going to be so much more impactful than having to take in a deluge of surrenders.
So, okay, this is going to sound like I'm very ignorant, but like I told you, I really dislike politics. So who makes those laws in the state? Would they be contacting the governor?
The governor, their legislatures, their representatives, because they're the ones that legislation. Those are the ones who enact or pass laws. But governors, they're also extending these by executive order. There's some governors who are doing it. Massachusetts right now, it was the governor who extended the moratorium, and already landlord associations are suing, saying the executive order is not legal, it's not lawful. So we'll see how that shakes out, but the legislature can still pass a law. They can to extend the moratoriums, and I mean there are a lot of ways this can be done. So yes, contact your local representatives, your state representatives. You can reach out to the governors, and just find your other housing advocates. Find out who else is really invested in this issue and how to move forward with it.
Perfect. Thank you again so much for your time. It's been really informative. So if you want to reach out to Abby, you can reach out to her via her website at PAWS, PAWS, openingdoors.com.
Got it.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.